It's like we have forgotten that. It's like we've forgotten that old Indian proverb: "Man who stand on mountain with mouth open, wait long time for roast turkey to fly in." You know, you're gonna do something. And the beautiful thing about actually doing something is that every time you do something, it changes things. Every single time you do something, it matters. Every time you take action, or don't, it matters. And I can prove it. Did you know that there was one guy who made one move 140 years ago? There was one guy who made one move who has our nation operating like it operates within this world. He was a 34-year-old teacher. He was a professor of rhetoric. He was a professor of literature. And on July 3rd, 1863, he was placed 3/4 of the way up a hill and told, "Whatever you do, you can't leave here." On that particular morning, he wasn't working as a teacher. He was a colonel in the Union Army. Now, he wasn't a colonel because he knew any military strategy or battle tactics. He was a colonel because he was the first guy from his hometown to volunteer. I mean, really, that's really how it happened. He walked into the recruiting office and they said, "Thank God we have a colonel. Next 2 guys through the door are majors." I mean, this is basically how it went. And they told this guy, they said, "Whatever you do, you can't leave here." They said, "The enemy is going to try to breach our line through you, and if they come through you, they'll get behind us and they'll catch us on a downhill charge. And they'll wipe us all out." They said, "If disaster strikes, it will have come through you." They told this man, they said, "Joshua Chamberlain, you are the extreme left edge of this line of 80,000 men that runs from you all the way into that town over there called Gettysburg." Well, they spent the entire morning laying up a rock wall. It's amazing. I've been there. It's like 110 yards long with pie plate sized rocks stacked one on top of each other like thigh high over a gentle rise with a big stone right in the middle. And at 2:30 in the afternoon, they took the first charge from the 15th and 47th Alabama. And Chamberlain and his men of the 20th Maine pushed them back. The 15th and 47th Alabama charged again and again, and on the 4th charge, Chamberlain took a bullet dead center in the belt buckle. He fell over, rolled around, realized he wasn't hurt, got back up, kept fighting, and they pushed him back down the hill again. They'd started in Bangor, Maine 6 months earlier with 1,000 men. They'd started that morning with 300. Now they're down to 80 and out of ammunition. Chamberlain's brother, Tom, came over and said, "We're leaving, right?" And Chamberlain said, "No, Tom, we're not going anywhere." Sergeant Tozier, the old battle sergeant, came over and said, "Sir, shall I sound the retreat?" He said, "No, Sergeant, we will not retreat." He said, "Sir, we're out of ammunition." Chamberlain said, "Have the men gather ammunition from the dead and the wounded." And the sergeant said, "We did that last time. We're out." The 12-year-old lookout said, "They're reforming. They're being reinforced." And up the hill they came with that weird rebel yell. And they advanced behind trees and they fired and came behind the tree and reloaded and fired and just advancing up again the hill. And Chamberlain's brother said to him, he said, "For God's sake, do something, say something, make a move, make a decision." And Chamberlain said, "Fix bayonets." They looked at him like he was crazy. And he yelled it. He said, "Fix bayonets!" And up and down the line, you could hear the steel on the steel as these men put their knives on their empty weapons. And then Chamberlain turned to the sergeant and he said, "Sergeant, have the men execute a great right wheel. Swing the left first. Do it now." Lieutenant Melcher, the flag bearer, had just walked up and he whispered to the sergeant, he said, "What's a great right wheel?" And the sergeant said, "It's an all-out charge. This crazy man means to charge." Before anybody could argue with him, Chamberlain jumped up on the wall, swung his sword down the hill and said, "Charge! Charge! Get him!" And they poured over the wall into history most of the people in our country hadn't even heard. Because 80 men without ammunition, 80 men captured over 400 of the enemy. Chamberlain laid his sword on the collarbone of an Alabama captain and said, "You, sir, are my prisoner." And the man turned around a fully loaded Navy Colt revolver and said, "Yes, sir, I am." Chamberlain passed one of the privates a few minutes later who was guarding 100 men by himself, 100 of the enemy. And the private said, "Sir, I have no ammunition in my weapon." And Chamberlain said, "Well, don't tell them." It's an amazing story, isn't it? Isn't it amazing and absolutely accurate? Just like I told you, that really happened just that way. But here's the amazing part. Historians say that had Chamberlain not charged that day and the South had won at Gettysburg, the South would have won the war. See, I always thought that if the South had won, we'd be the North and South. But historians say that had the South won, we would have a continent that looked more like Europe. And historians say, had Chamberlain not charged, we would be a continent of 9 to 13 countries, which means that when Hitler swept across Europe in the 1940s, there would not have existed a United States of America to stand in the breach. When Hirohito systematically invaded the islands of the South Pacific, there wouldn't have existed a united anything, much less a country big enough, powerful enough, strong enough, populous enough, and wealthy enough to fight and win 2 wars at the same time. The United States of America. It's an amazing thing that happened.